Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Legend of Korra Avatar video. And this is going to be the first in a series of 3 videos which will act as a wrap-up conclusion to my Avatar and also my Legend of Korra rewatches. So this first one is going to be my Legend of Korra complete 52 episode ranking list. The second video, which you'll get next week, is going to be the Avatar The Last Airbender complete 61 episode ranking list. And then the final video, which will be the week after that, so 2 weeks from now, will be Avatar versus Korra. Is it fair to compare the two shows? We'll be discussing that. And then when we do compare them, is there an obvious kind of show that comes out on top? We'll be discussing the strengths of Korra, the weaknesses of Korra, strengths and weaknesses of Avatar, what we learned from doing the rewatch basically. We'll be using some data which we get from both episode rankings lists, which I'll get into with Korra, of course. You'll see those kind of bits of data, the analysis I did on my list, and we'll use those to compare the shows as well. So that's basically what you're going to get for the conclusion of the rewatch. So how am I going to do this list? This isn't going to be a case of like you sitting here for 20 minutes and me slowly revealing the list to you one episode at a time. When I show you the list, which will be in a couple of minutes, you'll just get all of them at once. It'll be my full list up on screen. So there's no need to, I suppose, skip through to see where, a episode kind of is placed, because the list will just be completely there. Instead, the intro of this video, I want to be basically how I actually formed the list, because I think this also helps to, I suppose, understand that I actually did put a lot of thought and time into putting the list together. And also, it is a case of like 52 episodes, like how do you go about doing a list like that? And so, I decided to do a little bit of a tutorial on this, and it also helps to explain where my list came from. So how do they make this list? Because the struggle, of course, is you're trying to juggle 52 episodes, accurately place them, and you have no structure if you just look at a list of the 52 episodes of Korra. How do you go about ordering them? Because if you just start from like Welcome to Republic City and say like, oh, it's roughly in the middle somewhere, you're going to end up with this absolute mess of a list because there's no structure to it. So I came up with a couple of steps to make it easier, which is effectively breaking a big list down into a bunch of smaller lists. So step 1, as we see here, is going to be the introduction of these tiers, and these are like quality tiers. I'll show you those tiers in a minute, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically go through the 52 episodes and place each of those episodes into one of these tiers. So I'll cover the tiers now. Here are the 6 different tiers that I use. You can choose to use different ones if you want. Again, I'm explaining this because it helps you understand my list, and it might also help you form a list if you ever want to do this as kind of a little bit of an experiment yourself. So I used 6 tiers. I called the first tier, the best tier, excellent. The second tier I called very good. The third one was good. The fourth was average, the fifth was below average, and then sixth, the worst tier, was bad. Now, the grade there is basically just something that when I actually show you my list, is there to be the visual representation of the ranking tier that it's in on the list. When I was putting the list together, I wasn't thinking about A, B, C, D, E, F. I wasn't thinking about the scores. I was thinking of just in terms of the vague, like, excellent, very good, good, average, below average, bad. That's what I went off. And then this is just to give you guys a better comparison for what each of those tiers kind of actually means. So you'll see on the list that the stuff that's in like the A tier is the max tier and so on. It's pretty simple from the graphic I have up. The scoring system I put on this kind of retroactively, as I said, I didn't specifically assign a score to every episode when I was putting the list together and then just order it by score. That would have taken too long because, like, what's the difference between, there's a lot of very good episodes, as you'll see on the list, and what's the difference between giving an episode an 86 and giving it an 87? And does that really, at that point, the numbers don't really mean all that much, so that's why I didn't do that. But generally within the tiers, this is the way I was viewing it, that the stuff that isn't excellent is stuff that I would definitely give over 90 or over out of 100 to the stuff that's bad, I think, is under 40 out of 100 and so on here. So you can sort of see that I do consider any episode that I would give like over 75 out of 100, over 3/4 of the max score to be very good. So it's a kind of big tier, but I think it is fair to give something that has over 3/4 of the score the very good rating. So that's just an idea of my tiers. You can obviously work yours differently if you want. So step 2 is basically that once you've done the tiers, once you've gone through the list and put them into tiers, you'll be left with 6 separate lists, but they have an order to them. Like you have 6 lists now that are in an order. So you have groups of episodes above other groups of episodes and so on. Obviously at this point you would finalize, like, does any episode need to drop out of a specific tier, go up a tier and stuff like that. They're the decisions you're making at this point. But step 2 is to attempt, if possible, to apply an order within each of the tiers. So if you have, say, 10 episodes in your good tier, try and order those 10 episodes against each other, because you rate them all fairly similarly, and now is the time to bring in the specifics of like this episode versus this one, and try and create like a 1 to 10 of your good episodes. So for my list, as you'll see, I didn't have a lot of episodes at all in like the bad tier, in the below average tier, even in the average tier. So those tiers came together very quickly. Similarly, my top tier came together fairly quickly. So this is where the last sentence here comes in. If a tier has too many episodes, leave it until the next step. That's accounted for. So for me, my very good and my good tier had like, I think like 20 and like 15 or something like that episodes initially. So that was way too much to try and order just on its own without any structure. So that's what the step 3 is about. So as it says here, at this point, you probably have the top and bottom of your list sorted. You've probably done those tiers and they worked out fine, but you have lots left in the middle. So step 3 is, in these large tiers, separate the episodes by book, which is basically taking that 20 episodes that you have in the good tier and separating that good tier into 4 different lists based on what book they're from. So that's what the next example, I have a little bit of an example here. So for this example, we're going to use the very good tier, and again, it's a complete example, I just made this up, and the first 3 episodes from each book. So what I have here is a basic kind of like, I think it roughly applies to my list of like, in book 4, Korra Alone's one of the best episodes, so that's rated above the first episode and so on. So that's how I do it. That's my very good tier. It's those 12 episodes, and I couldn't order all 12 at the same time, so let's do 4 separate lists. And it's much easier that way because it's easy to rate books, episodes against each other in the same book, because you know where the important episodes are. So you're then left with an overall tier of 12 separated into 4 lists that are just 3 long. So the next step is that, because we have these lists, it allows us to do this specific analysis to kind of determine what the full list is, and that, okay, we have 4 number 1 picks. That means our favorite very good episode has to be one of those number 1 picks. In this example, I just said that let's decide that the revelation from book 1 is our favorite of those number 1 picks. Then to decide the overall number 2 on the list, it means that it has to either be the book 2 number 1 pick, the book 3 number 1 pick, or the book 4 number 1 pick, or the number 2 pick from book 1, because you might rate like all potentially of the book 1 episodes above the book 2, 3, and 4 on your list. That's the way it works. And basically it turns a large amount of episodes into just making a bunch of decisions between 4 episodes. And eventually, if you get rid of a category initially, a book, you're left with a decision between 3, 2, and eventually you form the list. It should make it much, much more easier. So after this very long step, that's probably the longest step in the process, because you're making the big decisions at this point in your hard to decide tiers. You should have all 6 tiers in order. And the last thing to do is literally to just put the tiers in order and assign the 1 to 52 number rankings to them, and that should make your list. Of course, do some final checks, look over the list, make sure, especially with episodes that are at the top and bottom of specific tiers, potentially do they need to swap place? Does your weakest episode in the good tier actually need to drop into the average tier? And does your favorite average episode need to maybe go up a tier? They're the sort of little decisions that you make just to see if you haven't accounted for anything. But that's it, and then, you know, that's it done. And now to get into my list. So just before we get into it, final things to note, because I don't know if everyone who watches this video is going to have watched all of the rewatch. So I just want to make some final notes before I get into the list to cut off any questions before they happen. And that is that this is my personal list, my personal rankings based on my thoughts on the series. This is not meant to try and be like an objective analysis of the series and stuff like that. So a lot of personal decisions of episodes that I know I like that maybe the entire fandom doesn't necessarily like. You'll see some maybe disagreements with this, and that's because it's my personal list, and I'm not trying to account for how the fandom overall, how the average Korra fan across the entire fandom would feel about this. Secondly, feel free, of course, to ask any question about specific episode placements from the list, but I will say that part of the reason I'm doing this after the rewatch is that the rewatch and the specific episodes, like the review of each episode that I did, should make my placement fairly clear, because those are very in-depth reviews and they should really make it clear where my criticisms are. If you're worried about why an episode is so low, that should explain it, but by all means ask a question in the comment if you want. So, moving on to the list, here it is. Apologies if it's a bit cramped and tight, hard to read, but it's hard to fit that many episodes onto one screen. So here is my 52 episode list. You can see it's just a list. It had to split into 4 columns because of the layout and stuff like that. But here's what it looks like, and you can see it's a little easier to read because I've done the categories, because I did the tiers, and you know that, okay, when it says A there, that means that the first 11 on my list I would consider to be in the excellent tier, which is A. And then there's only one episode you can see at the bottom that I'd place in the bad tier. And so you can immediately see that, okay, so the weaker tiers, which were like D, E, and F here, which is average, below average, and bad, it's only the bottom 6 that I actually consider to be in that kind of second half. Otherwise, the first 46 on the list are in the, you know, excellent, very good, and good tiers. So that's a very interesting thing, I think, to note about this, in terms of, like, I feel at times when I was doing the rewatch, like, I maybe was focusing too much on negatives and the critiques that I had about the books and stuff like that. But I feel the list now actually helps to just really be like, look, even though it's critical, I still love most of Korra. Korra is a really, really high quality show, and I think I'm absolutely justified in placing most of the series, 46 out of 52 episodes, into good or above tiers. And that really makes it clear that there's only a couple of episodes that I really think are on the weaker end of things. So let's address that. Remembrances is in a tier all on its own, and I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. If you watch my review of Remembrances, you know that I really do feel that this is a tier below. I think it would be an insult to the other episodes to even place Remembrances in a tier on par with any other episode, because it's a recap episode. It shows scenes from previous episodes in a series that doesn't have that many episodes overall. We didn't need a recap episode, especially in the way it was done, and you know that I feel it wasn't a particularly well done recap, even though it had to be a recap for like budget reasons and stuff like that. It's just not a particularly good episode. They had an opportunity to make it something interesting because they had some budget for new animation, but I still don't feel they used it all that well. So that's why it's the only episode I place in the bad tier, the only episode I would give a rating out of 100 of lower than 40. The second worst tier, below average. we have 3 episodes here, the weakest of which is Peacekeepers, follow the Sting just above that, and the Terror Within just above that. I think the Sting and Peacekeepers, no one really has too much of a problem with. I think most people would consider those to be 2 of the weaker episodes from the book. Compared to previous times when I've maybe done like my top 10 worst episodes of Korra, I actually have changed the placement of the Sting and Peacekeepers. I think before I would usually place the Sting to be the weaker episode, but now during the rewatch, I think I do lean towards Peacekeepers actually being the weaker episode, because for me, the Sting has such an important part of like Mako's arc from the book, which I actually do really like, whereas I think Peacekeepers actually stands out a little more for just kind of feeling like it's a frustrating episode to watch, because it's focused on aspects of the series that aren't the most interesting, whereas at least the Sting covers a side plot in a great deal, and it is the kind of core of that kind of Mako Varrick Asami plot that's going on, even though it has probably one of the, for me, weakest parts of the series, with the random decision to make Mako and Asami get back together, apparently. I don't think that brings the episode enough to make it go below the kind of overall kind of weakness of Peacekeepers. The Terror Within, I think, is an episode that some people may even have right towards the top of their list, but I place it quite low down, as I said in my list, because I just feel it's an episode that doesn't accomplish much. In a book where I consider that the Red Lotus aren't a particularly well-developed group, I don't think Korra has an amazing interaction with the group, because at this point, she hasn't met them yet. And she's knocked out after like a second of just seeing them. She knows about them. But here's a big fight that takes place around trying to kidnap Korra, and she's not really involved in it at all. And it highlights that book 3, a lot of it is kind of about, they're just after Korra because she's the Avatar, and her personal interaction with the villains isn't really that much throughout the series. And this episode, I think, just highlights that, in that it is a fight. It's a good fight, I'll acknowledge that, to capture her, but it doesn't work out. So it's just an action scene, when what the Red Lotus needed was character development. What Korra needed was a bit more direction in that book. And then the whole second half of the episode feels like kind of almost wasted time, because it's like the hunt for who kind of sold the city out, and it ends up being Ai Wei, but he's killed off in the next episode. And it just feels like, wow, that episode really, when you reflect on it, didn't accomplish anything. It's just that action scene. I don't think that action scene is enough to make it that high up on my list. Similarly with the D, which I consider to be the average episodes, Reunion and the Earth Queen. I think the Earth Queen was one most people expected. It's another one of those episodes that I feel kind of like the Terror Within. It's just kind of like, what did this episode really accomplish? Like, I've never been the biggest fan of the Earth Queen, like, as a character and her involvement in the series, and that it definitely feels like they just developed her a little bit to kill her. And here's an episode where we give her a little bit too much focus. I didn't rate it lower, because the Kai stuff in the episode I actually do quite like, and it has some elements of, like, City of Walls and Secrets from Avatar. So there's some positives to it, to the point where, like, I consider it in this tier, and didn't drop it into like below average or anything like that. Reunion, I think, is just a disappointing episode. I don't think it's like inherently bad, but it is such a disappointing episode. Towards the end of the series, it's Korra's grand return to Republic City, meeting up with her friends again, and it tells the whole story when her reunion with the Air Kids in The Calling is much better done than her reunion with Asami, Mako, Tenzin, everyone. Plus, I think just them sort of half addressing some of the issues of Korra being gone, of like not writing to them, that kind of being brought up and then never going anywhere, and the kind of typical, by the numbers, we'll get past our issues by just doing the action stuff together again. It just felt very weak, and that it almost felt like the writers just like, oh, the Team Avatar is interacting with each other again, that's all we need to do. And this was the time to actually give some development to that, and they didn't. So that's the unfortunate thing for me with Reunion, and especially the action scene of the episode revolving around Prince Wu. and the whole kidnapping of him feeling very underdeveloped, of like, did we ever see Kuvira like call for him to be kidnapped? It just kind of, it felt like something that happened, failed, and you just moved on. No problem. Okay, fine. Kuvira must have tried to take him out. It makes sense, but she never said it really. So they're the weaker episodes. That's the important thing to cover. Let's go to the top of the list actually now, because again, this is the stuff that's the easy stuff to tackle. Beginnings Part 2, that's, to anyone who's watched my content, that's no problem at all. Interesting that I placed Beginnings Part 1 at 7 and not 2. I do acknowledge that Part 2 is a lot better than Part 1. I still think Part 1 is excellent because it is such a character exploration of Juan, and it's kind of like a requirement that Part 2 is able to do the amazing thing that it does because Part 1 has done kind of all of this groundwork beforehand. So they very much are like a 1 and 2, but if I had to place them, I think fair enough in where they're placed. They're both in the excellent category, very highly ranked episodes, but there is a couple of episodes in between them. So my second favorite episode is Light in the Dark, the finale for Book 2. You know I love the spiritual elements of Avatar and Korra, and I feel that Book 2 did them so well. I love Korra's character arc in Book 2, and how they tackle it here with Tenzin showing Korra the Tree of Time, him using what he learned from Aang in the previous episode and kind of using his version of that advice to help her through it. I loved the fight, the spiritual element, her using the Tree of Time, the pure cosmic energy, the how they managed to make all these kind of complex, like more mechanical, kind of detail-orientated aspects of like how things work, and it all makes sense. It's the highest stakes we've had in the series up to now. I love Light in the Dark. I think it works out so well as an episode, and Korra's speech at the end. I think the only real unfortunate thing about it is that like they have that slightly weird Mako and Korra secondary breakup, and I think a lack of follow up in terms of like her speech makes you believe that they're going to do something really big with the spirits, but they don't really do anything just yet. But the comics still could. Korra Alone at number 3. That I think for sure that's an episode that kind of has to be in almost everyone's top 10 at the very least. I've never really seen too many people criticize that episode all that much. When Extremes Meet, I think, is one of those at times sort of like criminally underlooked episodes, ones that isn't given the credit it deserves, when I think it's a fantastic episode. Tarlok especially, like I think that's one thing you kind of notice with some of the Book 1 episodes in the excellent tier. There's a lot of Tarlok in there with like Out of the Past, Skeletons in the Closet, of course, the backstory involves him. When Extremes Meet especially is Tarlok's episode. That is about Korra and Tarlok's feud. I love their interaction, how it feels intense, that they hate each other, and it builds and builds. They're both doing everything like in the media to hurt each other, and it builds to this incredible fight. And the reveal at the end of Bloodbending is so incredible. Like, what a moment in the series. It's right up there. If I was doing like a moments list, the Bloodbending reveal is huge. So there's that. And that I also think explains Out of the Past, like getting in on the last spot in excellent tier, of like that reveal of like Amon coming in and taking out Tarlok after what he just accomplished in the episode before that, When Extremes Meet. Huge moments at this point in the book, and it's, I think, very, very telling that so many of those final episodes of Book 1 are in this list. Like, Skeletons in the Closet is there. I would say definitely it is primarily for the flashback, which is only like 7-8 minutes of the episode. I think the rest of the episode is still good, but those 7 minutes I think are so good that's why it warrants a place so high up on the list. The backstory and how it connects everything together, Yukon, Tarlok, the bloodbending, it's such a great explanation. That's why it's so high up. A New Spiritual Age is just such a unique episode. As I said, I love the spiritual element. That's why it's here. Darkness Falls, what a moment! Like in the episode right before the last one in Book 2 to take out Rava like that. Very, very intense. And again, I love the spiritual stuff. Turning the Tides. I like that episode because it's just stuff keeps on happening. Pema's going into labor, the island's being attacked, the air kids have to jump into the action. It's just everything's going wrong, but we're just about making it happen. Lynn's sacrifice at the end, really, really amazing. The Calling was one of those episodes that I kind of was like, I think I initially had it in the lower tier. I was probably like somewhere midway in the B tier, the very good tier, and I realized that no, this is one of the better episodes from book 2. Like I love the Air Kids stuff of getting them a little bit like a one-on-one time with them. It's probably some of the most emotional stuff with regards to Korra's journey to recovery, and the stuff with Toph, and the reunion at the end is such a powerful scene with her getting the medal out, her being so happy to see the Air Kids. It works really, really well for me. The rest of it, I suppose, is where maybe I don't have as much to say about it, because for sure you can see here, look how long the very good tier is. From 12 to 34, it's all in the same tier. And this is where I think doing it like this helps to ease some of the sort of fears that you have about doing these lists. Because if you take the tiers out, some of this looks terrible. That like what's going on here? And the winner is at the 27th spot, like the mid-season finale of book 1, that amazing attack by Amon in the arena. You have that placed below the halfway mark, but then you realize that actually it's in the secondary tier, and because I rate most of the episodes in this tier so closely together, it's on par with the likes of Beyond the Wilds at number 12. So like the difference between number 12 and 34 on the list is actually very small, because I have so many in this same category. That 12 to 34 is the secondary category of episodes that are rated from, I think I have it like as high as 89 to as low as 75. So the difference is fairly small. So like that Rebirth realistically is probably rated like 75 or 77 or something like that, compared to like Beyond the Wilds at like an 88 or something like that. And there's not that much of a difference, but they're so close together. Whereas I think if I took the tiers out, you'd almost feel that like, wow, Rebirth at 34, like, wow, did you give that like a 5 out of 10 or something like that? And I think that's the key difference here, that, as I said before, 1 to 46 are all episodes that are given like a pretty big rating. If I go back to the tier list to check the grading stuff on this, 65 is the lowest score I would give any episode in the first 46, and that's The Spirit of Competition, which is one of those episodes that I think a lot of people don't particularly appreciate. I actually really like it for being fairly well written, so I think it's one of those episodes where like it's, for me, that episode is probably closer to like 70 than it is to 65. So most of the first, I think, 46 episodes on this list are still, I would give a score of probably somewhere in the region of at least 7 out of 10 to. And it leaves only those bottom 6 episodes as the kind of odd ones out. And as I said, for sure, the B and C categories for me, my largest tiers, were the hardest ones to really put into order because they are so close together. But I think I like what I have here. Beyond the Wilds is like the one that's kind of on the borderline. I think I initially had it in the excellent category, and then I kind of replaced it with The Calling because I felt The Calling did a little bit more. The Southern Lights is an episode I like. I know a lot of people perhaps don't because it's an early book 2 one, but I think it does so much of the like early groundwork of like the main plot, in that like reflect on like the Southern Lights and compare it to Light in the Dark, the finale, and you can see where they set up so much kind of stuff that they come back to. I think it's really well done. Old Wounds, amazing Lynn episode. The Last Stand, the finale, and even that, like the finale episode, which is so great, being 15th. I think some people, if I didn't have the tiers here, that'd be like this absurd thing. But then you realize that I've basically, my top 10 is this like elite tier, the highest rated episode. And so The Last Stand is the 4th one below my elite tier. That's still fairly high up on the list. The Revelation, The Aftermath at 17. I think book 1 is a really high quality book. Again, we'll do some of the analysis a little later on the books. Endgame is in there because I think it's probably one of the weaker episodes from book one, but it's still very, very good. Operation Beifong's here, Enter the Void, The Guide, A Breath of Fresh Air, Day of the Colossus. There's a lot of really good stuff in here, but you can see that some of these episodes, there's a few little bits and pieces with them where they perhaps don't do enough to get into the A tier. They're missing that amazing moment that gives them the worthy of being in the excellent tier. And again, I rate them, a lot of these episodes, very, very closely together. The C tier, I suppose, is where maybe some of the debate comes in, because these are the episodes where I kind of feel like I've had to make some tough decisions here. Like Venom of the Red Lotus being in this tier, but being the top of this tier is kind of like the sort of pluses and minuses I had to do to sort of make it work out in my head. Of I have issues with book 3 overall, and I think some of them come to light in the finale. But it is such an intense episode with some of the stuff and how they wrap it up. So I felt I placed it as low as I kind of could, acknowledging some of the issues I have with the episode, but still acknowledging the positives. And then in this tier, I think you see a lot of the episodes that are sort of middle of the road, where they're good, they're solid. In a lot of cases, there's nothing inherently wrong with them. There's just not as much of the blow away amazing moments in them. So Rebel Spirits is definitely one of the weaker episodes in book 2 as the intro. Original Airbenders, I think, had so much potential, but they, for me, cram 2 episodes into one with this one, and nothing gets the development it needs. A Leaf in the Wind, I think, is one of the weaker book 1 episodes. The Coronation is a sort of dull episode. It's very woo focused. It's not the best. Battle of Zaofu is kind of another one of those ones where this is where a lot of the book 4 being underdeveloped stuff comes into play. Kavira's Gambit, very similar with Batar and Kavira's relationship. Long Live the Queen being down here is here because it's an episode where I feel it's a lot of style and not a lot of substance, where okay, cool, Zahir kills the Queen, that's the core of the episode, but everything else is kind of waiting around. They're in and out kind of talking to her, waiting for stuff to happen. Korra and Asami are escaping, and there's nothing of note really happening in that side of the story. And so it's an episode where the only thing, similar to The Terror Within, where the only notable thing is either the fight scene in The Terror Within, and in this case, the Queen being killed. In Harm's Way is kind of one where I feel if there's any change I'd make in the list, that might end up higher up. In that it's an episode I like, but I couldn't really find enough with it to place it higher. Enemy at the Gates is again I think just one of those episodes where they're just getting stuff into position. It's not hugely important. This is the one where I think they give you the backstory on Sue and Kavira, but it just doesn't work. There's not enough given to us. And then The Spirit of Competition is okay, look, they focus on the romance. It's not the best part of the show, but for what it is, it's a pretty well written episode, and I think that's what keeps The Spirit of Competition from being in the lower tiers. So that's my thoughts on the list. If you want me to explain any placement on this list in any more detail, definitely leave a comment. So now we're just going to end things up with some analysis on this, a bit of numbers on this. So as I say here, now for some numbers and analysis, which will help us compare Korra to Avatar in upcoming videos. So I'll be doing this very same analysis to Avatar when I do the Avatar list, and then we can compare in the final video. So here's the Korra episode quality. So again, I've brought the grades in here. Once again, A is excellent, B is very good, C is good, D is average, E is below average, F is bad. So this is the number of episodes from the series in each of these tiers. There's 11 excellent episodes. There's 23 very good episodes. 12 good episodes. 2 episodes are average. 3 episodes are below average, and 1 episode is bad. And what that means is that 21% of the series is excellent. 44% of it is very good. 23% of it is good, which means that overall, splitting in half, 88% of the series is in what I would consider to be a strong category, where the positives completely outweigh the negatives. It's a good episode. that means only 12% of the show would be in a weaker category, where it is kind of average or below average, where the negatives of the episode either kind of balance out the positives that it has, or the negatives are a bigger part of the episode. And you can see it here. 4% of the episode is average. 6% of the series is below average. 2% is bad. I think that is the statistic there. 88 versus 12. That I perhaps feel, if you just watch the individual reviews for all 52 episodes that I did, that maybe you'd almost believe that I felt more of the series was like much weaker, when I still rate so many of the episodes I critiqued fairly hard, actually, quite well, because the aim of those videos was to find any issue, anything that could be improved, and point it out. That's what we're kind of doing here. Next bit of analysis in terms of splitting that up by book quality. So again, we have the same grades, and we're looking at let's look at book 1 here. So you can see, book 1, 4 of its episodes are in the top tier, 6 in the very good tier, 2 in the good tier, and then nothing in the lower tiers whatsoever. And then even if I was to be a bit stricter, I really think the only thing I'd potentially do would be maybe drop Spirit of Competition into average. So that's just literally changing that 2 to a 1 and adding 1 into the D category. The fact that it just doesn't have anything in E and F really speaks to the overall quality of that book. Going into book 2, 5 episodes in the excellent tier really shows how well, when book 2 was on, and it was really, really good. 6 in the B tier, again, really, really high. That's 11 of the 14 episodes in the top 2 tiers. 1 episode in the good tier, none in the average tier, but 2 in the below average tier. That's Peacekeepers and The Sting, and then none in the bad tier. So that's really good, but those 2 episodes sort of weigh the book down a little bit, because they're 2 episodes right next to each other, 5 and 6 in the series, and they're in a lower tier compared to the amount that it has. So it sort of, in a way, balances out book 2 having the most in the highest tier. Book 3, unfortunately, I don't feel any of the episodes really quite get into the excellent tier. The one that comes closest, I think, is Old Wounds, but because it's more of a kind of more minor character in Lynn, who is not quite main character material, I feel it doesn't quite get into the absolute spotlight. But still, 6 episodes in the very good tier, 5 in the good tier. And I think that's the thing with book 3. There's nothing overly bad, but because there's 5 episodes in the good tier, book 3 has the most in the C grade tier. That's where I think it's sort of the issues come into play. That means that those episodes maybe have 2 issues with them per episode, whereas in the very good tier, maybe there's one thing that holds it back from being an excellent episode. Those episodes have 1 or 2 things, and a lot of the case that is just episodes that could have been used to develop the Red Lotus, the individual characters of Red Lotus better, and so on. There's 1 episode that's average in book 3, 1 episode that is below average, none bad. And then book 4, you can see it's very spread out. It nearly has 1 in every tier, where there's 2 excellent episodes, 5 very good episodes, 4 good episodes, 1 average episodes, no below average episodes, but 1 bad. And that's the big thing here, where it has the recap episode. So it has the 1 in the tier all on its own, the worst by far. And it means that it's almost a book where it's just down an episode because of that. Book 4 has 13 episodes, but it might as well only have 12, and that drags the book down. And again, like book 3, I think there's a lot of episodes where they're good overall, but they maybe have those 1 or 2 things that could have been done better to get it into a higher tier. So next up we have basically, okay, there's the data of where each of the episodes are placed, but how do we actually get a result from that? And so this is what I did. I assigned a points value to the episodes based on what tiers the episodes were in, and these are the results. So I said, if an episode is in the A tier, the excellent tier gets 6 points, B5, C4, D3, E2, and F1. And if you do that and basically add up those points given what we just looked at, this is what you get. Book 2 is on top with 68 points, Book 1 is on second with 62, Book 4 has 57, and then Book 3 is on the bottom with 55. So they're all still fairly close together. There's a 13-point spread in this, which I don't think is too much at all. They still all have a large amount of points. What this doesn't account for, though, as we'll see here, is that Book 2 actually has one more episode than any other book, and Book 1 has one less episode than any other book, because 13 is the average. So we have to account for that, because otherwise that means that Book 2 is basically the number 1 just because it has another episode, which adds to its points value. So this is where we get the average points value, which should tell us exactly what the case is. And so that's just a matter of dividing by the number of episodes. So that means actually Book 1 comes out on top with the average points of 5.2, which would be a low B average, because obviously we said that we give 5 points to anything that got a B grade, the very good tier. So Book 1 Air is like, that speaks to the quality, the consistent quality of episodes. Again, going back to where the episodes are, no episode in D, none in E, none in F for Book 1. Very, very consistent, but perhaps not as many in the excellent tier that really put it over the edge. So there's that. And yeah, Book 2 Spirits comes in second with a 4.9 average, which is a very, very high C. It's so close to being a B average. Book 3, it's not fully in order. It's in book order here, but you can see here Book 3 Change gets a 4.2, which is the lowest, which is a low C average, and then Book 4 gets a 4.4, which is a mid C average. But I think it's very telling that those are very close. Like 5.2 is the highest, 4.4 is the lowest, and that's the difference between like an average of a B and a C. That no average goes below than that, which again speaks to that percentage from earlier on where we said 88% of the series is strong, 12% of it's kind of weak. So that's the data I wanted to present from the list here. In the comments, let me know if there's any other like analysis you wanted me to do on the list, because this is the first video in this series. I wasn't really sure how exactly much I wanted to do. This seemed like the obvious stuff to do to come to a conclusion, but let me know if there's anything more you want to add. So I think the telling thing here is that I would always say Book 2 is my favorite book, but the data suggests that like Book 1 is actually the more consistent book. And obviously what that really accounts for is that I am sort of willing to give Book 2 a pass for having those 2 weak episodes, Peacekeepers and The Sting. And when you account for that, Book 2 actually ends up kind of having that higher average, because I sort of look past some of the weaker aspects of Book 2. But based on the analysis, it's otherwise the same. That Book 1 is so consistent, but maybe doesn't have those high points that make me invest in it as much as I kind of should have. And I think it ultimately comes down to the fact that it is the shortest book. It didn't quite have enough time to develop everything, but the things I would say about Book 1 would be that like it had that like on 1 or 2 things, whereas with Book 3 and 4 there's a lot of stuff where it said it about. That wasn't developed, that didn't get enough time, that character didn't get the focus, that character didn't get enough time. Whereas with Book 1 it's kind of like I would have liked a little bit more in a mod them to like address the like equalist effect on the city in terms of is there actually an issue between benders and non-benders a little bit more, and the finale to explain some of the technical details a bit more. And it's like, okay, that brings it down, and I think Endgame is sort of a little bit weaker as an episode because of that. But compare that to like Book 3, where it's just like the villains feel underdeveloped, the Red Lotus as a group feel underdeveloped, Korra doesn't really have a main character arc, characters are sort of getting forgotten a little bit, it's a bit disjointed, and there's a lot of stuff that bring it down. With Book 4, you know, you can see the stuff that brings Book 4 down, where it's like Kuvira isn't quite developed enough, her relationship with Sue isn't quite developed enough, the arc is almost so focused on Korra's recovery and her being away and needing to return that you don't give enough time for like character stuff once she returns, because when she returns she's right back into the action. And I think that's on the character front what keeps Book 4 down in the way that it does. So I think the statistics sort of very much speak to how I overall felt about the book. So I'll cut back to the list to just end off the video and say that, you know, it took a long time to make this list, but I'm very happy with the way it turned out. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on my list, anything I had to say in this video. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.